Okay, we are looking at chapter 5 of Miracle Boys. Good readers go back and they review before they start a new chapter. So we have learned in chapter 1 that Lafayette's the first person narrative, which brings us into the book. And New Charlie is his brother, whose name is actually Charlie, but came back with a meanness in him after he'd been to Rahway School of Boys. In chapter 2, we go to Central Park in New York before Lafayette was born, and his dad died of hypothermia. And we know that because they used the word was. He tried to rescue a dog and died. In chapter 3, we learned that Aaron and New Charlie want to be rappers. New Charlie takes care of plants. We thought about plants as a symbol. We got a glimpse into Tyree and Lafayette's home life. In chapter 4, we learned that Charlie had held up a candy store with a gun, and that's why he was in Rahway's home. And Mom was still alive when he left, and she passed away after he died. So here, in this chart here for chapter 4, we have some things that characters do and what that tells us about them. For example, Mom and Tyree are figuring out bills and clipping coupons. That tells us they're responsible. We know they're responsible because they're budgeting their money. You see, I made a mistake with money. That's fine because these notes are for me and not for anyone else. And we talked a little bit about juxtaposition, how as they're sitting on the couch having this serious conversation, there's these happy dancers on the TV, and how those two things really contrast with each other. So starting there, we're at chapter 5. And I'm going to go ahead and label it chapter 5 and put my first little note-taking bullet. And I set up my Actively Learn to read it as a student this time. So I'm just going to be plugging in some random things as we go, but this is exactly what you should see on your screen. So have you ever been to a funeral? Yes, I've been to my grandmother's funeral. I've been to several funerals. It's been a while. All right, chapter 5. After Mama died, my great aunt Cecile came up from South Carolina saying she was going to take me and Tyree back home to live with her. She's a small woman with white hair, tiny silver glasses, and hands that shake whenever she eats or drinks something. The two things I noticed right off were how she smelled like the candy part of candied apples, and how perfect her teeth were. Tyree said it would be 2,000 miracles rolled into one if they were real. 2,000 miracles rolled into one. Well, that tells me that there's no way those teeth are real. I had met Aunt Cecile only once when I was real small, and Mama had taken us all down south for our daddy's uncle's funeral. Aunt Cecile was our daddy's aunt. I didn't remember much about that time, but Aunt Cecile remembered me. You were just an ant of a thing, she said, picking me up like I was still 2 instead of 9, and squeezing me to her. And look at you now, just as beautiful as I don't know what. I'd never been called beautiful by anybody, and after Aunt Cecile said that, I went into the bathroom and checked myself in the mirror. Tyree always said I looked like our daddy. He was dark and curly-headed with brown eyes. My eyes are more black than brown, and my hair's more kinky than curly. Tyree makes me keep it cut short, sort of a fade, and when it's real short, you can see where it starts out as curls. I looked at myself in the mirror and tried to smile like Tyree, but one of my front teeth overlaps the other in a way that makes me look a little bit meaner than I actually am. Still, maybe Aunt Cecile was right. Maybe I was beautiful underneath it all. So we've kind of met a new character here. Aunt Cecile. And she seems like she's a kind, older woman. All day long, people have been coming in and out of our apartment bringing us food and juice. Now I want to stop here. If everyone's in and out, the setting is the day of Mama's funeral. And in some people's cultures, friends and family come by the house. That's what's happening here. Bring us food and juice and talking about how sorry they were, how big I was getting. Someone even brought by a pound of bacon, 2 cans of Spam, a dozen eggs, and a loaf of Wonder Bread in case we got up in the morning and didn't want to eat the other stuff. Tyree and Aunt Cecile took everything everybody brought us and thanked them. I sat in the living room mostly, staring at the television set and wishing everyone would just leave us alone. I wanted Mama to come home, wanted to hear her coming up the stairs and singing that Me and Bobby McGee song the way she always did. Me and Tyree were both wearing black suits. Mine was too short at the wrists because Mama had bought it the year before for me to wear on special occasions like school assembly and church. Since there hadn't been that many assemblies and I usually wore pants with a shirt and a tie to church, the suit had hung in my closet until Tyree pulled it out the day before Mama's funeral. They'd let Charlie come to the funeral and stay with us for a few hours afterward. When Aunt Cecile saw him with those 2 guards from Huawei, she crossed herself and pressed her handkerchief against her mouth. Now, if she crossed herself and put her handkerchief against her mouth, that tells me that she's feeling sad. Charlie stood real stiff while she hugged him, his eyes sweeping over everybody, checking us all out. There wasn't any feeling in them, just hard, flat eyes that didn't belong to the Charlie they had taken away. "Charlie," I whispered, trying to hold his hand. "Mama died." Charlie snatched his hand away from mine and glared at me. "How come you ain't save her, huh?" he said. "If I was here, I would have saved her." I stared at the guy standing in front of me. It wasn't Charlie. Charlie would never talk that way, never blame me for anything. This was somebody different. New. New Charlie. "I tried," I whispered, taking tiny breaths to keep from crying. "I would have saved her." New Charlie turned away from me, went over to the corner, and crouched down against the wall. He stayed that way, glaring at his hands. The 2 guards watched him the whole time. By the time he had to go, I was relieved. "I didn't kill her," I kept wanting to say to New Charlie, but I couldn't. And on the way out of the house, when New Charlie looked back at me and Tyree, then punched the wall, I felt like he was punching me. Tyree had his arm around me, and when New Charlie punched the wall, he pulled me closer. We stood there listening and could hear what New Charlie was crying all the way down the stairs. "Charlie," I whispered, because he sounded like I remembered, like he did when that dog died, hurt and small and lonely. "Charlie, don't cry. Please don't cry." His crying sounds kept coming through, but they got softer and softer, moving farther and farther away from us. "Charlie," I whispered, burying my head into Tyree's arm. "Where'd you go, man? Where'd you go?" Based on this chapter, what's the best inference about Charlie? So we're thinking about Charlie, we're thinking about the evidence of Charlie, we're thinking about Charlie was there with his guards. He says if he was there, he would have saved Mom. He punched the wall. Aunt Cecile is his favorite aunt. Prison changed him for the better. You got to read the whole thing. He has always hated Lafayette, or he loved his mom a lot. Okay, I want you guys to choose your answer. I'm going to intentionally choose a throwaway. Aunt Cecile is his favorite aunt. There's no evidence for that. That is the end of that chapter.